Welcome back to Unmuted Nation, and I've got a special guest with me today. There's a story that we talked about last week, and there was a leader of, or the president of a local NAACP chapter in Vermont that was having some troubles and made some decisions to move or relocate her family. That President Tabitha Moore decided to join us today here on Unmuted Nation. Tabitha, welcome. Well, first of all, we're going to have a conversation with Tabitha. I have tons of questions. I got some questions via email, but I know that generally, like when we see attacks, racial attacks in this country, there are a subset of us that understand what's happening. We understand the magnitude of those issues and how it not only affects us, but our families and our everyday activities. And then there are still a subset of Americans that choose not to acknowledge these issues or think that we are really being extreme when we bring these issues to the forefront. So I want to start this conversation off with Tabitha without putting words into her mouth, because you may have read the story or you may not have heard anything about it. Tabitha, welcome to Unmuted Nation.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Oh, absolutely. No problem. So I think first and foremost, I find myself, and this is real. I am somebody, obviously, I follow a lot of news, and I'm really kind of involved in a lot of activism just in different areas. So I try to stay connected to the NAACP just because of its historic significance and what the organization has not just done for Black people in this country, but generally for Americans in general. But I still find people that have no idea that it still exists. I say NAACP and they're like, what? And so just talk to me a little bit about how you got involved with the NAACP, what the motivations behind it were, and even how you connected to, my understanding is that you created a chapter or started a chapter.
Mm-hmm. So I first got involved with the NAACP when I was in graduate school at Syracuse University. There was a branch on campus, or a chapter on campus, and a branch in Syracuse proper. I decided with a friend of mine to join the city chapter instead of the college chapter. We wanted to know what was going on in Syracuse, and so I became an active member of that branch, and it was incredible. It was a great experience. And then I ended up leaving Syracuse over a decade later because I realized it was time to come home to Vermont. I grew up here in Vermont. I'm a 6th generation Vermonter on my mom's side.
I think I read that. So you leave. Can we just start there? So you leave Vermont, go to Syracuse. Yep. Obviously, different landscape, different environment. I'm from the South. I live in the Northeast now, so I learned. I was not really used to cold weather. I'm in my 4th year in New York. So growing up in Atlanta, it got cold, but not really, and not for long. not for long. So by March, I'm ready for spring, and I'm ready for things. And like living in New York, it's like I don't even see the same thing that I would see back home until June, and I'm like, maybe July, but it's like it's really long. So from a weather difference, how much of a difference is it from Vermont and Syracuse?
Well, Syracuse is right next to the Finger Lakes, and it's right next to one of the Great Lakes. So we get a lot of lake effect snow. So it's actually more snowy in Syracuse, but it's cold in Vermont.
Got it. When I think Vermont, I think cold. And I think I've always thought cold. For some reason, I think about evergreen trees. And these days I think of Bernie Sanders. And those are the like main things when I think Vermont. I'll just be honest and say this. I usually don't think Black people.
No, nobody does. I think we're less than 1% of the population. Vermont is over 94% white. And that's actually, I left in 1996 after graduating high school because I wanted to see people who looked like me. I wanted to be around people that understood the experiences I was having, because growing up here, it's incredibly isolating, especially, in the 90s. We didn't have internet. We didn't have like a lot of the things that people, have today to connect globally. And I had to get out. I was dying, before I was even an adult. And so, when I came back in 2009, it was with the express purpose of trying to bring visibility and voice to Vermont's marginalized populations, to doing the work that hadn't been done when I was a kid.
So six, I can't get it.
That's hard to say.
Sixth generation. So your family, you can trace your roots like really back to Vermont. And with that, I would imagine that you have some pretty significant and solid relationships within the community. Do people realize that you're Black? That's, I asked that question just because, but like before we jump into the NAACP, I think that oftentimes even Americans are still surprised at the different shades of Blackness and the different shades that we come in. So, there are stereotypes that kind of affect that, but in your experience, I would imagine, especially since your family has been there for so long, at least have you guys been regionally in really the same part of Vermont or in other areas of the state?
Right. No, Vermont is pretty tiny. So my family's from Rochester, and then my mom is white and my dad is Black. My mom moved us to southern Vermont, closer to Rutland area. And that's where I grew up, and that's where I came back to, where I went through high school. But to your comment or your question about, do people even realize I'm Black? Like, you and I looking at each other, you're like, oh, she's real light skinned. In Vermont, you would think that like I was the darkest thing that ever walked the planet. Growing up, like it was just like, people, touching your hair, like all the things you hear about white people doing. That's what grew up.
The things that make you cringe. That
it was. I mean, like the first time I straightened my hair, I went to my mom's salon. I raised up all this money to be able to go and get a perm, and the white lady doing my hair was almost in tears. And I don't know what she used. I don't know how she did it. But she was like white people perm. And I walked out looking the same. She took my money. I'm like 13 years old. She's like, no, that's what it should look like. Knowing full well she didn't do nothing to it. And I was like, you're kidding. It was just like, there was all of these ways that whiteness kind of converges and conspires, not even intentionally,
right,
to other you in Vermont. And that was my story growing up. And, coming back, I wanted to offer something different, not just for myself to reclaim my roots and be like, no, I am a Vermonter, even though I don't look like the rest of you or most of you, but also for other young brown and Black people and people with other marginalized identities, just to be able to have someone that's like, no, you exist, you're real. What you're experiencing is actually happening to you, and we need to do something about it.
Right. I like the fact that you focused on that point, that you wanted to reaffirm and reassert your own identity, just because your roots are like deeply rooted in this state. And I think I love to have this conversation, and we talk about it often here, that worldview is huge. So I think going back to you deciding to leave and to experience something different, to see people like you, I think a lot of times we find limitations on how people think and how people respond because they're limited in their understanding of the world, just because they've had a lack of exposure. And so I think for people that live in Vermont, with statistically being statistically less than 1%, it being less than 1% Black, I think a lot of times people probably make a lot of decisions with excluding Blackness and not even thinking that that's a problem.
Oh, absolutely. One of the issues that we had at the beginning of the pandemic was that our Department of Health was not collecting race-based data on COVID-19 rates. So we're watching across the nation, Black and brown Vermonters are watching across the nation as these really disparate numbers of infection and death are coming up for people who look like us. And we're looking at the statistics that are coming out like, hey, wait a second, why aren't you reporting or collecting on race data? So the NAACP and a couple of other local groups got together and worked with the Department of Health to be like, you need to be collecting this and you need to be reporting this so people understand the racial disparities. And lo and behold, the same racial disparities exist here in Vermont as they do elsewhere racially. So oftentimes decisions are made without us.
And that, I mean, it makes sense why they would be, but I also think that that's why organizations like the NAACP are so important. So before we jump into what's happening in Vermont and what happened with your chapter, can you just talk to me just a little bit about what the NAACP does? And for people that are not familiar with the work, they are familiar with the significance of the organization historically, but not really aware of what the organization does now, and how effective or how impactful being involved with your local chapter can be. Just walk me through that just a little bit.
Sure. So the NAACP is the nation's oldest nonpartisan civil rights organization, founded in 1909 by an interracial group of people in New York. Most people know the NAACP for the 50s and 60s civil rights era legislation and push. The NAACP is also behind affirmative action, which has helped white women, you're welcome, more than any other demographic. We've continued to do a lot
of that statistic is very important because it's also white women that are also claiming that because of affirmative action is the reason that many of us are there.
Oh yeah,
completely dispelling our talent, but also using that as an excuse for their children not getting into college and things like Absolutely. That. They're the number one demographic that complains about affirmative action. So it's important to note that.
Oh, and they benefit, like I said, they benefit more than anybody, any other demographic group. It's been them. Who was that? Lori Loughlin, was that the one that did that whole weird conspiracy thing where paying people like? And now they're trying to be us. You see that there's another woman in Indiana, another white woman.
It is. I'm like, I do not want to see one more. And I don't understand the crave for oppression. I really don't understand the desire to be. I do understand why Blackness is attractive. I get that piece of it. I get that piece of it. But I do not understand the need or desire to kind of create oppression and make that like desire to be that, or even to manipulate. Like it's just very bizarre.
It's like this thing where they see us as trendy. I mean, and again, we set all the trends in this nation. We are the barometer of cool and of what should be coming next in the nation. But like, if you know anything about racial oppression, you would not want to identify with it. Anyway, we were talking about the NAACP.
Right. We can. I can probably land there and be there all day.
Right. Oh yes. So when I'm looking at what is the NAACP doing today, the NAACP continues to do and influence national level legislation and national level conversations within government structures, particularly related to race and racism. Obviously, there are much newer groups who are have the pulse, especially of the younger generation, like Black Lives Matter, who I absolutely adore. We do a lot of work with them here in Vermont. But the NAACP really focuses on the structural. I kind of think of it as like infiltrate and sabotage, making sure that we get Black leaders in different positions of power in our current government structure. And systems, and then doing more advocacy, like you saw in Minnesota. One of the presidents there was pepper sprayed and maced along with everybody else, getting arrested, still doing the same work that they've always done. But that's again, we're still focused on the big six game changers. And
it's still very important. How would someone connect with their local chapter?
Well, you could go to NAACP.org, the national website, and find a local branch that way. You should be able to look on social media. Facebook is something, I know it's kind of cringeworthy for younger generations.
We'll do the research and make sure people connect.
Yes, if you go on to national, you should be able to see a list of all of the branches across the U.S.
If my memory serves me right, Rachel Dolezal was also serving as a president of a local chapter for a hot second. I remember that. I was actually still on. I was doing a radio show in Atlanta at the time, and I spent a week there because it's just like there was just so much. It was so much time to unpack.
Well, it was, and here's what I'll say. The fact that she faked her race, like we went over that a little bit. I will say about the NAACP is it is an interracial organization because they recognized back in 1909 that if we were to end racism peacefully, white people have to get it. Because we're not going to keep dying because white people don't want to get it because they're too comfortable with where they are. Let's not play. So white people have to step up and get involved, not just in the NAACP or other organizations. They've got SURJ that's showing up for racial justice. They got to do their own work and get right with it. Because if they don't, this is not going to end peacefully. But trust me, it's going to end. And I think that that's the piece where people, where people often forget. So when I see a white president of a branch, I'm like, we all kind of do one of these. It's like seeing a black person in Vermont. Like, how'd you get here?
Well, I think if you just by the name alone, people the eyebrows raised, or there's that moment of confusion. But I do understand the advocacy and the desire for white people to be involved. And I say that all the time. I think it's really important to know, white people, racism is not really a black problem. It's not. This is not a problem that we have with ourselves. It's just not. But I think if it's going to end peacefully, I think white people really have to be involved. And I echo your sentiments. It will end. Become a part of it. Be a part of it. So I first learned about you. I was reading a story on Black News Alerts, which is our sister network, and I was actually really, really interested. First, I'm like, NAACP leader. The headline was like, NAACP leader is leaving home because of racial attacks, and I'm like, first of all, that's it's ridiculous. Then I read Vermont, and I was like, oh, it kind of like it started to make sense, but I was also like, there are so few Black people statistically in Vermont. Yeah. Why would someone mess with what's the draw? So walk us through to first of all, you started a chapter you started the NAACP chapter in Vermont in the local city. What's the name of the chapter?
Rutland area.
Rutland. Okay. And when did you start that chapter?
I started the work in 2016.
Okay.
I think we were officially chartered in February of 2017.
Okay. All right. And so with starting a chapter, what does that really entail? Do you?
Well, you connect with your state conference president, and because Vermont is part of New England and New England is so kind of small, we have a regional president, a New England area conference president. Okay. So you connect with that person and say, hey, I'd like to start a branch. They kind of do a little research and say, okay, you can, begin the work. You have to get over 100 members, 100 people who are willing to become members, and then you submit your application for membership to your state conference president, who brings it forth to national, and national makes a recommendation as to whether or not you get to become a branch. And then,
was it a challenge for you to get the 100 people?
No, I had it probably within 6 months.
Okay. And so you guys launched this chapter, and what is there? Is there a work that you were looking to do initially? What was the initial motivation behind starting the chapter?
Well, I mean, the first part was bringing visibility and voice and kind of providing a lighthouse or some sort of place where people of color could go and feel like they were heard, feel like they had support, and had
they were seen.
Yeah, and have to have an advocacy group behind them so that they weren't facing racial discrimination alone. So that was the initial catalyst. And as I began the branch and recognizing that we kind of have 6 areas of focus, and one of those is education, I knew in Vermont I was going to have to do a lot of work. A lot of white people didn't know they could join the branch. A lot of people didn't know the NAACP even still existed. There's a lot of misinformation about race and racism around here, and a lot of denial. It's really easy. I think you mentioned something earlier. It's really easy for white folks to kind of turn an eye to racism, especially in a place like Vermont. And that is absolutely what's happening. There's so much resistance to recognizing the ways that racism just permeates every aspect of life. It's getting better. And I will say there are a lot of white folks around that get it, that want to do the work, that maybe don't know how. So my branch does a lot of educational opportunities so people can understand what racism is. We do advocacy and we handle complaints as well. Because there's only 2 branches in Vermont. The second one was founded by my friend down in Windham County, Stefan Gillum.
Okay.
But because there's only two branches and people know the legacy of the NAACP and the fact that the NAACP deals in structural racism, we spend a lot of time working on state level issues, including legislation, or if agencies are like, how do we deal with this sort of thing? We will hop in and provide resources and direct them to organizations that can help them.
Okay. All right. So obviously great work. Obviously some opportunity there. And people were interested. So why the attacks?
Well, we are the second largest branch in New England too, by the way.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, congratulations on that. That's major.
That was something that we did this summer. I think the attacks. Now, whenever you're leading a racial justice organization, whenever you're leading anything related to race, you're always going to have haters. You know that's going to happen. And throughout the years, I've had a few, and it's like, okay, whatever. Just checking that to make sure that the level of threat isn't awful. I never read the comments on any article because
listen, I understand covering racial injustice, both live or like panel style. I don't read comments at all.
No, it's awful. And in Vermont, it's particularly heinous. I mean, I have people contacting me like, hey, this person, said this about you. Are you worried? I'm like, I try to ignore it. But I think between the pandemic and then the recent, especially over the last, 8 to 10 years, focus on racial injustice and the killing of unarmed Black folks by law enforcement, and in general, the ways that we are being just destroyed. White people, I should say, are starting to pay more attention. The media is starting to pay more attention, which means Vermont is paying more attention. And so as this branch continued to develop, the hate continued to rise. But over the last 6 months, last 8 months, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, everybody that's been killed has kind of brought the nation to a place of reckoning. Plus, we have Donald Trump in office, just absolutely upending. To me, I'm actually kind of grateful for him because he's just exposing what we've been saying forever that white people have been trying to deny.
I think there are levels to it, right? I think people could not see it. And so now we've got cameras everywhere.
That's right.
You can see it instantly. And then Donald Trump enraged people that were, fuming racists that were suppressing it for the longest time. So he allowed them to feel free enough to express these things and also made them feel so comfortable that they could do it as if Black people were going to take it like it was the year 1789. And it's just
Well, and in Vermont, what we see too is that we had a legislator, Kaya Morris. She was our only Black woman in the legislature, and for 2.5, 3 years, she was harassed constantly by white supremacists that said, "Yes, hey, I'm a white supremacist." And finally, it got to a point where she was just like, I can't do this anymore. And our attorney general, to me, he totally missed the mark on his decision that it was okay for white supremacists and white people to harass her the way she did, because she's like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I walked with her through the case. Especially how we became really close friends was that she called me when this was happening, like, I don't know what to do. And the attorney general has dropped the ball in terms of her investigation on so many levels.
Why do you think, or do you think that it's easier to turn a blind eye to some of the racial injustice in Vermont just because the population is so small?
Well, it absolutely is. So getting critical mass to push back is difficult. But even when we do push back, white people rely on systems of supremacy and the nuanced languages. So reasonable is a word that you see often in laws that allows discretion that is based on identity. So what's reasonable to you if you are a white upper middle class man who's never experienced discrimination, what is reasonable in terms of what you can take when people are coming at you because of your race is very different than if you are a Black woman who's been dealing with this your whole life and you understand what these threats mean. So when you have those types of discretionary words built into your legal system, what you end up with is another level of perpetuation of systemic racism. And that's what happened in Kaya's case. So what essentially happened was our attorney general said, that's okay, you get to harass people like that. It's not very nice, but to not recognize the mental threat, the threat to existence, that is where he failed.
So And obviously, if this was happening with a legislator, and the attorney general was slow to action, or really no action at all, when this starts to happen in the community, like what was the tipping point for you that had you say enough is enough? You know, like I'm here, I'm doing the work, but
Right.
I got to pull back. I have to take a break.
So and I'm just repositioning, and I've made it very clear here in Vermont, make no mistake, I'm staying in Vermont. I'm going to continue to do this work, but I have to reposition myself so that I'm taking better care of my own well-being and that of my family. When we talk about, Black and brown people and what we need to be doing, the first thing is making sure that we're not killing ourselves to fight for this, especially when white people keep doing so much more. So the tipping point for me was, a whole host of what I call my love letters, from people naming me as a Black supremacist. We had a gentleman who ran for governor this year who is like so QAnon out there. But he has, because it's run, he had a pretty big platform, and it was really scary walking around my town seeing all of these Clar signs. His last name was Clar, naming me and Kaya and Susanna Davis, all of these other prominent Black women, naming us as Black supremacists who are ruining Vermont, and just all of this really hateful stuff intended to inspire other folks to threaten us. And they did. And I got, all kinds of, like I said, love letters about that. I was kind of like, that was irritating. But then my daughter decided that she was going to work in her schools to raise the Black Lives Matter flag. She's 17 years old. And white people came out the woodwork to bash her. I'm like, you're gonna come after us. I mean, like in horrible ways. Grown folks.
Sadly, I can identify. I did grow up in the South, and though I was in Atlanta, I grew up in a very white, affluent suburb. Mm-hmm. And so most of my weekend interactions, and of course, my parents were intent to ensure that I saw myself. But I did not see myself. And so I understand the type of backlash that can be faced. I mentioned recently on this show, I came to school one day, brand new school, and "Niggers Suck" had been spray painted on the front of the building of a brand new school in a metro Atlanta suburb. And so, like, just to see these things and I know that they are still there, people think it's not just a big deal, or they don't realize how scarring that is, or how their words, especially what gets me really is the adults, like the adults that are coming after children that want to do right in the world. And some of these adults, you've missed your opportunity, and your opportunity to right some of your wrongs is to support the injustices you see against people, but you're still flagrant at 50. Right.
And we had a situation in Vermont about a year and a half ago where thousands and thousands of these slips of, I wish I had one on me so I could send it to you, but it looked like Confederate money on one side, and I had like John 3:16. It looked like it was anti-Semitic on the other, and it had the Confederate flag on it. Thousands of these were put in the stacks of libraries across southern Vermont. And somebody tipped me off to this because the libraries knew this happened, and they decided that they were going to keep it quiet and not say anything about it because they didn't want to draw attention to it. They didn't want those people to win. And I'm like, no, because Black and brown people need to know where we can go safely, and we need to help you deal with this. So we blew that up. We were like, nope, we need to talk about it. We need to have community conversations. And so we changed the flow of that conversation. But oftentimes in Vermont, that's the response. Oh, let's pretend it didn't happen. Let's not give attention to it, because if we don't give attention to it, then it's not a problem. No, because Black and brown people still have to walk into those spaces not knowing, but still having that feeling, like you're in a horror movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem is people, a lot of people want to sweep things under the rug, and they feel like Black people, we are actually drumming up trouble and drumming up issues because we are bringing these issues to the forefront. Absolutely. But I also don't understand how our desire for equality turned us into Black supremacists. I just don't understand how I'm asking you to treat me like a human. And we're asking you to treat us like humans, treat our women like humans, treat our children like humans. We can look at easy statistics, the deniers of the systemic racism and even the systemic and systematic oppression. There are people that just deny it, but you can look at even things as small as like behavior statistics on 6-year-olds and how a Black 6-year-old male child is classified a behavior problem much earlier than his equivalent that's a white 6-year-old. Same child, same action, same behavior, same manifestation of just behaviors, and one is classified a problem, and that classification follows them through the education system.
Yeah, he'll end up on an IEP. He'll be diagnosed. He ends up on an IEP. He's treated, problematically, and that's what begins the school to prison pipeline. And in Vermont, our school to prison pipeline, unfortunately, is thriving for Black and brown kids. We have the same statistical issues as everyone else, where Black and brown kids who commit infractions, the same infractions as their white peers, are more likely to have exclusionary punishment or more likely to be expelled. And we know what that does to children. And what are we going to do about that?
And we'll see. And I think, honestly, I'm happy we're having this conversation, because I think, honestly, the Black community would not believe that these same problems are happening in Vermont. And they would not believe that they're happening like and I've talked to people in other places like Nebraska, and these same problems are happening in these states where the population of Black people is lower, but that really means that there's nobody speaking on behalf of these people. There's nobody there to advocate on behalf of these people. But the marginalization still exists. Right. So I think it's you started to see these attacks on your family, and your daughter wanted to get the Black Lives Matter flag implemented just in her school or in schools across the area.
In our school district, which includes, I think it's like 4 elementary schools and then the high school. And she was successful. And somebody who was running for legislature who aligns closely with the Clar guy, came out talking about how, the Black Lives Matter is a terrorist group, that, it's, all of these horribly inaccurate things based on like Breitbart style news. I mean, just absolutely inaccurate. The school decided that they were going to raise the pride flag at the same time. He's talking about how it's perverse, just like wild out there.
Anything, and it's. I have a guest that says regularly that if you advocate for the least, the low income, even the marginalized or the minority, you cover everybody. But there's something in white minds that tells them the moment that we do that, we're going to take everything from them, and your blanket of equality will protect everybody, including you. But I just don't. It's bizarre that. So on that level, what was the response once they successfully raised those flags, and obviously you had your I guess an arm of conservative people that were like, this is terrible, and Black people are terrorists, and gay people are perverse. So what happens after that?
They haven't raised it yet. They delayed the raising because they need to get their flag policy in place. Because in response to it, this group of people decided, well, I want an all lives matter flag, and I want this flag, like just the childish sort of behavior you would expect from people who just don't understand equity or equality, has been the response. So the school has delayed that in order to get their flag policy in place. So we're still waiting for that to happen. And in the meantime, my kid has continued to experience hate. For me, the eye opener was when my daughter called me. She was house sitting for me. I was doing some work up north, and she was house sitting, and I got a call at 1 a.m. And she's in my closet crying. I'm like, honey, what's going on? She's like, somebody just broke into the house. And I'm like, honey, are you sure? It could be lightning, whatever. She's like, no. She was like, she had convinced herself that somebody had broken into the house. And she's like, Mom, as I'm calling 911, my partner's calling 911. And as we're waiting for them to arrive, the police to arrive, she goes, Mom, what are the white supremacists who are mad at me for getting the flag raised? That's what my kid is afraid of. She's not afraid of the man. She's not afraid of somebody coming in to rape her or to steal our stuff. She's afraid of white supremacists. And so for me, that was a moment where I had to.
At 17.
At 17.
At 17, in the year 2020, she's hiding in her closet, afraid of white supremacists.
Yes.
What's crazy is when I hear, I don't know if you saw, there was a viral video a few months ago, just shortly after George Floyd, of a little black boy playing with a basketball in his driveway. Yeah. And he sees the cop car coming down the street and hides behind the car. And it's like we live in this America right now where some people could see that. I saw it I knew exactly how he felt and the fear that he felt immediately. But what I was hearing from conservative people that I grew up with, there's like, wow, I can't believe you people are training children to be so fearful. And I think that's the response that some people would hear when they hear about your daughter hiding in the closet, that her mom has trained her that white people are evil and white people are after her. But this is the lived experience. This is real. Right. And this is really, so how did you counsel her through that?
It's been a road. But you know,
I can't imagine. I mean, I think, like I said, going to school at 17 and seeing that spray painted across the building is something that I never thought, just based on the revisionist American history that I took. I thought that this was over, and I wouldn't have faced that. That's decades ago. But to know that this is still happening in this way, and that fear is so alive and well, when you start to reshift, obviously she'll probably be graduating soon. But I'm sure that this is not going to do anything but promote activism in her as well.
It absolutely has. And she's incredibly strong, and she's like, okay, fine. Like, that's how white people want to act. That's fine. I'm just going to come back with something. I'm like, okay, she's getting into her activist self. She's 17, finding her identity. And for her, this is an important part of that process. And, at 17, nobody can tell you nothing. So,
exactly.
And I'm like, good, let it protect you for now. And I think, it was just one of those really, and nobody was in our house. Nobody had broken into our house, by the way. She was fine. But it was just one of those moments where, for me, I ended up calling 911 because we have dogs, and our dogs usually sleep downstairs. They'll only come upstairs if somebody's going up with them. And I heard the dogs barking and getting closer. So I'm like, okay, somebody's got to be in the house, because, that's not how our dogs respond. Mm-hmm. So it was a scary moment that kind of made me take stock of all of those hateful messages and things that have been coming out about me, and all of the awful things that were happening. Like, what is the damage that not my activism, but people's response to my activism is doing to my family? And then a couple weeks later, one of the things, we have this Wallingford Day activity, and everybody got to paint pallets and put them outside your yard, and you could do a walk around the community and see the different pallets people had made. And we did one that said Black Lives Matter. And this was like a couple days after the incident with Reese. And so I said, is it okay? Can we put this in our yard, or would you rather put it in Maria's, our neighbor's yard? And she's like, I don't want that in our yard. I don't want, because I don't have signs or anything like that in my yard, because I'm already a lightning rod.
Right.
It's easier to find
to protect my sanity while I'm at least.
Just a little thing. So we put it in my white neighbor's yard across the street, and it's right under a street lamp. And so everything happened with Reese. We had that there for a couple of weeks. Everything started to come down a little bit for my family. And somebody vandalized our Black Lives Matter sign.
Wow.
And my youngest daughter, who's 8, was the one that saw it. And, having to explain to my kids why people are doing this, I'm just like, you know what? I don't have to do that. I can do this work from a place where people aren't going to act that way, where I don't have to see this guy, this guy's signs everywhere, these signs that say this guy who's calling me a Black supremacist. I don't have to, there's ways to position myself in this work where I can preserve my sanity and my children's well-being. So after an incident with my white neighbor who called the police on me, I was like, Lord, I almost made it 43 years.
A full target. A full target.
Calling the police saying, stop touching me, stop hitting
me. I think why I love this conversation, and even talking to you, because there are people every single day that are, and I'm talking about Black people. These stories are important for Black people, because Black people arrive at new places of enlightenment every single day. And for some Black people, all of the things going on in the country didn't really hit them until they saw George Floyd, or they heard about Breonna Taylor, or they really never put themselves into that category that this could happen to me, or this could be me, or and so they want to get involved in the work. And when they go to get involved in the work, they think that sometimes it's going to be easy, or that the attacks are going to come. So I think that I think your resilience and your decision to say, I'm not going anywhere. We're going to reposition, but I'm going to stay in this fight because it's important. But it's also important for Black people to know this is not going to be easy. And I think it takes its toll on you emotionally. I think, I think acknowledgement is important. I'm happy, sort of. I was sort of happy when white people started to acknowledge things in the month of June, but I also likened it to America jumping behind causes temporarily, and it's very similar. When I looked at June this year, and then I looked at Pride Month 2019, it looked parallel to me. It was almost the exact same. Companies that you would never imagine turned their logos, rainbows, and everything. We saw everything in June 2019, and you would have thought America was the country for the LGBT community. And then you get to June 2020, and everything is Black people this, Black people this, Black Lives Matter, but it's only for this moment. And so we see this partial or partial acknowledgement. That's what I'll call it, partial acknowledgement. But it's not enough, because I think there's a natural resilience that we have because of what our ancestors have endured in this country, and what Black people, even if you present Black, you kind of reap the benefits of what Black people went through on this soil. And I think any treatment of equality that you feel today has to be attributed to those that came before us here on this land, because the Black experience on this land is the same, no matter where you come from. And so you start to see that if you have Black kids here and you just came here, your kids are going to live that Black experience. So it's important for you to understand the history, but also understand the fight and the people that are in the fight. And it's important for us to keep our minds wrapped around that work, but also protect ourselves and protect our sanity and protect our space. And especially because white people won't do it for us. And I think like it is unreasonable to believe that your daughter could endure that type of trauma and not have to deal with that internally in some way, right? And so I don't think enough people realize that, and I hope that they kind of gather that from this conversation, that listen, it's not always going to be easy. What are some of the things that you hope to see turn around in Vermont, at least through, not just through your work, but the work that your chapter is going to be able to do?
Right. Well, it extends because of the way Vermont is so small. Everything is so localized, even though it's state level. What I want to see happening is more white people joining racial justice organizations or movements in a sustained way. Like I think you said, they're all about it right now. Is this an Instagram moment for them so they can say we're part of it? Or are they going to commit to it? Like, y'all just join in this fight. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. You need to calm down and let us lead. Your feelings are not the most important thing right now. And the fact that you now get the pain we're going through should not be the thing that drives this process.
I think this is another show. I'll probably bring you back for this. White people leading the Black Lives Matter movement is not the way. You need to be involved, but you can't lead. You can't tell us that's your white privilege in place, allowing you to come and take hold of a movement that really has nothing to do with you. And I understand that people are feeling it. I understand that you're starting to feel passionately, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. However, you can't jump into that and squeeze Black people out of it once again, because a lot of the destruction that's happening in the nation right now that they are attributing to Black Lives Matter is not being done by Black people. Nope. It's key to watch that. It's key to watch that in all of the media, because they'll say it was a Black Lives Matter group, but you will never hear them say it was a Black person. And they can't show you a Black person because it's not there. So it's like white people have accosted a movement, attached themselves to a movement called Black. So I guess I can't be surprised about all these white people out here pretending.
And I'm so happy to say that, because I'm like again, the NAACP is interracial. We will always be interracial. We'll continue to, like do those sorts of things. And white people, you got showing up for racial justice. You have the legislature. You have every business. You have your own places that you could be doing this work. And you need to
and you should be. That's what will help us do this work where you are.
And slow it down. Wow, they got to slow down, because I mean, like, we're seeing it in Vermont with pushes for legislation. Like, after what happened with Kaya, there's all these bills popping up like, oh, can you get on this bill? Can you talk about this bill? Will you testify here? No, because those are white bills. If you want to know what's happening with us, if you want us to be involved, if you want us to tell you what needs to happen, you need to calm down and do what we say as far as how we need you to be, so we can show up in these spaces. So when you create these legislative agendas and you want us to come to Montpelier between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. and wait for half a day and testify on your bill, that is white supremacy in action. Listen to the ways that we say that we need to be reached. So those are some of the things that we're trying to do here in Vermont, is to change the way that the system is responding, and then to look at the ways that the system is problematic. My brother here, Mark Hughes, is doing a phenomenal job, and he is just a powerhouse at really trying to name, and he's also doing a lot of legislative action as well, trying to just get white people to see the ways that they're functioning in government. It is problematic. But, in Rutland, it's going to be continued education. Rutland is behind. Rutland is behind Vermont, let alone the nation. So Vermont is behind the nation in terms of dealing with racial justice. And Rutland is behind that. Like, wow. Like, you would think that I'm riding around on a lion wearing a dashiki, throwing a spear at white people, based on the way white people be talking about me. It's bad. We have a lot of education to do so that white people even understand the problem, that there is a problem.
I hope that this conversation adds some visibility to that. And I really, really hope that I'm inspired by you doing this work. I think that we have to take it how we get it. And like I said, people come into moments of enlightenment at different times, and they realize that it's time to connect at different times. And I think we have to embrace that, and we have to be available. But I also think it's most important that we do this safely, because I'm reminding of all these guests that come through, and I have a guest that she's been here a couple of times, and she says often, there's no way to make white people feel good about racism. And there's no way to make white people feel good about white supremacy. And so it is not going to go peacefully. She says the same thing, unless they are involved with it. They're not going to be peaceful with us disassembling systems that were designed this way. They're not broken systems, but they are systems that were built this way, and they were built to work the way that they work. And that's always to keep us out of them. And so those systems have to come down, and it's important that we keep doing this work. How can people support what you're doing or support your local chapter? Is there a way for us to do that?
Yeah, people can join our branch. The reason that I've done such a tremendous amount of work on increasing our numbers is because people need to understand. I think you alluded to it earlier. People don't think about states like Vermont, where there's a low population, but our people are suffering in places like Vermont. So first thing people can do is join my branch, NAACPRutland.org. You go to the site, big, huge button on the bottom that says join. That's one thing that you can do. Join your local branch, wherever you may be, or join a local racial justice group. Black and brown people, I'm guessing that's probably who's watching this. Take care of yourself first so that you can stand.
I get some stragglers, some white people sometimes.
Because like I said, we got a lot of loving white people who are, well-intentioned, who are really trying to get better about this here. And they've been really supportive of me. But those people watching it, you got to take care of yourself first. You do not want to get to a place where you have to move. Reposition yourself in the fight, stay in it. Join our branch, join your local branch. And do not stop talking just because they tell you to. That means you got to speak louder.
Do not stop talking just because they tell you to. I think that's the best advice. I think we have to remember that sometimes, because they are going to tell you to stop. They're going to tell you, and it's also not comfortable. You get too loud and you will be thrown out of some places.
Right.
you're not, you decide to be an advocate at your workplace, you may be looking for another workplace, but that is all part of the work, and that's part of the journey. It's not an easy one, but I think connecting with an organization like the NAACP, other organizations that are out here doing the work, because, and I have to keep saying this, the moment that you become enlightened, you should take some action, you should get involved, but don't take over. You can't take over, and you shouldn't take over when people have already been putting in time and effort for this work. They've done the work, so join them. Don't try to trample on them.
Okay.
Tabitha, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you come back. Obviously we have conversations like this often. So I will invite you back, especially because I call it the cabinet segment, but we have, I bring people in just to talk about what's happening and strategize on what we need to do. And we need a lot of strategy, especially with what's going on in the nation now and in the last 90 days. I'll give you a final word. Any final things you want to say?
Thank you so much for paying attention. Oftentimes in Vermont, like I said, people don't realize that people in states where there's low population are suffering. And we need to absolutely make sure we're taking care of our family in these places as well.
No, absolutely. I agree 100%. Tabitha Moore, thank you so much for coming to Unmuted Nation. I've got more happening in moments, so stay with us. Of course, unmutednation.com. Follow us on Twitter, Unmuted Nation, and Facebook, Unmuted Nation. I'm back with you in moments right here on Boss FM.